Chapter 10, Ethical Misconduct in the Courts and Responses. So again, we're still talking about courts. Here are the learning objectives. Okay. Defense attorney misconduct. I have literally seen a defense attorney fall asleep in court. I am not joking. This poor old dude fell asleep in court. So yeah, could that be considered ineffective counsel? Well, interestingly, state appellate court said that if the lawyer wasn't asleep during a crucial part of the trial, it wouldn't be considered ineffective counsel. Yeah, I don't know. I would definitely, I would argue really hard that if my attorney fell asleep during my trial, that would be ineffective counsel. So, I don't know. But the legal standard for what is ineffective counsel is really high. You have the right to an attorney, not a good attorney. Isn't that sad? But it's true. Most misconduct by defense attorneys falls under the realm of negligence, though not criminal behavior. Prosecutorial misconduct, typically the things that they get, so the prosecutors typically get busted for withholding evidence that might prove that the defendant is not guilty, misusing publicity, using false evidence, or using a challenge to exclude a specific juror. Trying to encourage perjury or jailhouse informants. I'm going to kind of keep moving. Misconduct as far as using expert witnesses. Maybe a prosecutor intentionally uses scientific evidence that they know is not true. Or they bolster a witness's, an expert witness's credentials to make him or her seem like they are more more qualified than they really are. Or just plain old Brady violations, which is when the prosecutor does not share all of their evidence with the defense. Judicial misconduct. Now, this is when typically we're talking about the judges. It is rare, but it does happen. Being neutral. Judge can recuse him or herself if he thinks that there's some reason why he or she should not be sit as judge in a particular case. If there is an appearance of impropriety, the judge should probably not hear that case. Biased decisions. Most judges strive to fulfill their role with integrity and honesty, taking care to protect the appearance and reality of justice. Misconduct is alleged when judges do not recuse themselves or act in a way that gives preferential, or if they do act in a way that gives some sort of preferential treatment. I remember we had a judge one time who basically said every time I could have a domestic violence case where a guy would basically beat the hell out of his girlfriend and the judge wouldn't give him custody time. And the next case would be someone who stole something and the judge would flat out say, "I hate thieves. I hate thieves." And he would say it on the record in court, "I hate thieves." And the kid who stole something would end up in custody, and the kid who beat the hell out of his girlfriend wouldn't. And it was just, he was very blatant, open, and honest about it. "I hate thieves. I hate thieves." So if you stole something, that judge was going to put you in custody. It was basically a done deal. Anyways. Other forms of misconduct. Yeah, judges occasionally still do some of this crooked stuff. They try to exceed sentences, exceed bail, keep people in longer than they're supposed to, don't put people in long enough, chew out jurors, all kinds of stuff. So there are some factors in wrongful convictions. Convictions have occurred due to state punitiveness, a weak case, error during forensic testimonies, age and prior criminal history of the defendant, honest mistaken identity by an eyewitness, and poor representation by the defense attorneys. Eyewitness testimony, a lot of you have probably heard this before. It is many times incorrect. And if we were sitting in class this semester, I would do the usual, have someone randomly get up in the middle of class and walk out, and I would ask all of you to describe the person who got up and walked out of class. And probably half of you would get it close. I've done it before where I had, maybe 75% of the people say that the person that walked out of class was a female and it was a male. And so eyewitness testimony is definitely not a real strong indicator. And when you've got eyewitness testimony as your main source of evidence, it can be wrong, and people probably don't mean for it to be mistaken. Sometimes it just happens. So, are people in prison right now because of mistaken eyewitness testimony? Yeah, there's probably a lot. False confessions. I still don't understand this, but I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen on numerous occasions where people really do confess to committing crimes that they didn't do. And I don't understand it. I don't understand it. But it happens. Racial bias. Is it more likely that people are going to convict a person who is Black of a crime? Yes. Absolutely pervasive, stereotypical belief that all defendants are guilty and a disproportionate number of defendants are Black. It happens. We can all say that we are not, that our country has moved past this, but go sit in a courtroom. Go visit a prison. Go hang out at the Fresno County Jail and decide if there's racial bias still in this country. People tend to prejudge the guilt of the accused, especially if they are a Black man. And it still happens. It still happens. Confirmatory bias is when someone ignores evidence that is contrary to what they believe. Makes sense? There's a lot of stuff that you cannot believe happens, and it does happen. You're like, no, there's no way. Sometimes it just does. Prosecutor misconduct. Why do they do things? Sometimes a prosecutor wants something to fit their theory so bad that they kind of make it fit into their theory. They ignore evidence to the contrary because they don't want to see what's right in front of them. They want to win the case so bad. They're so overwhelmed with other things. Their original theory doesn't fit this new evidence, so they ignore this new evidence. The human tendency is to seek to confirm rather than disconfirm. All this stuff on this slide makes sense. And does this mean that the prosecution or prosecutor's a bad person? Not necessarily. I think a lot of times we like things to fit a certain way, and we might kind of avoid things that don't fit a certain way. Explanations for misconduct of judges. Judges are immune from prosecution. So things like a judge letting someone out of custody and that same person getting released that same day and going out and murdering 10 people, the judge isn't going to get prosecuted for that. So that's one big, I guess, relief for the judge. Doesn't have to worry about getting sued. It's also difficult for attorneys to challenge the judge's actions, because who does the attorney complain to? If a judge is doing something inappropriate, now think about this, and this actually happened to me, not to me, like, I had a judge who was being very, saying very negative things on the record in court about the probation department, and I was a brand new probation officer. And I was a probation officer in court, and I didn't know what to do. Who do you complain to when a judge is saying something very detrimental about your agency on the record in court? What's the next step? Who's above the judge? Who do you talk to about inappropriate behavior? I mean, think about that. I go talk to my chief. My chief works for the judge. I work for the judge. We all worked for the judge. Judges have immense power. Very difficult when you have a judge who is possibly doing something inappropriate. How do you respond to misconduct? The Bar Association is typically who gets involved when attorneys and/or judges get involved in some sort of misconduct. Training, supervision, those are some things that can take place to keep attorneys and judges from becoming involved in misconduct. You've probably all heard of things like the Innocence Project. But learning and seeing more people being found ultimately not guilty after having been convicted of crimes that they did not commit is also something I think that is helping to turn the corner for some of these issues where maybe some prosecutorial misconduct has taken place. Conviction integrity units, mandatory DNA testing. Mandatory DNA testing is taking place now. In California, at least, if you are convicted of a felony, your DNA is automatically, you're swabbed. Now, does that mean that DNA is automatically run or tested? Not necessarily. You can imagine that, excuse me, you can imagine that the backlog of DNA waiting in California is probably pretty significant. So it might take years for that DNA to be run, for that person to be found maybe not guilty of whatever case it is that they could be sitting in prison for. So, but mandatory DNA testing is something that is taking place in California. Enhanced due process procedures and labs. These are all things that can and are now taking place in order for more accurate testing to be done on these older cases where people may have been convicted and ultimately not be guilty. Ways to reduce misconduct, blah, blah, blah. Identify errant prosecutors by name in trial and appellate opinions. Stripping prosecutors of full immunity. That's interesting too. Prosecute the prosecutor who did something wrong. hold judges accountable. There's another way that judicial misconduct can be curbed. Excuse me. I don't have COVID. I do have a cold. I don't have COVID, I promise. Not having judge be activists, conservative or liberal. These are some other things that could keep from judicial misconduct. These are some natural rights that we all should have. Judges need to remember this, right? And discussion questions. That's it.